Here's something they don't teach you in school. In 1933, some of America's richest and most prominent men formed a plot to overthrow the United States government. Did they get punished? No, but why did they fail? Today it's the business plot on MKUSUAL.
I appeared before the Congressional Committee, the highest representation of the American people, under subpoena to tell what I knew of activities which I believe might lead to an attempt to set up a fascist dictatorship. The plan as outlined to me was to form an organization of veterans, to use as a bluff or as a club at least, to intimidate the government and break down our democratic institutions. The upshot of the whole thing was that I was supposed to lead an organization of 500,000 men, which would be able to take over the functions of government. I talked with an investigator for this committee who came to me with a subpoena on Sunday, November 18th. He told me they had unearthed evidence linking my name with several such veteran organizations. As it then seemed to me to be getting serious, I felt it was my duty to tell all I knew of such activities to this committee. My main interest in all this is to preserve our democratic institutions.
That man was Major General Smedley Butler. Have you heard of this?
No.
Okay. This is fun. You're going to be in for a good one. Let's get into the business plot. In 1933, the United States was in the midst of a recession. Known as the business plot, this was a failed conspiracy involving top United States businessmen, some of whom were deeply involved in major industries like steel, shipping, and finance. The Great Depression had devastated the United States economy with 25% unemployment and widespread poverty. Major General Smedley Butler was a highly decorated Marine Corps officer who would become central to exposing this plot. He had served in Haiti, Mexico, China, that's interesting, and Central America, and was one of the most decorated military men in United States history. He later became a vocal critic of United States military intervention and the role of corporations in shaping United States policy. So in 1933, amidst the financial collapse and Roosevelt's New Deal reforms, a group of wealthy businessmen sought to remove Roosevelt from office. FDR was trying to implement programs to combat the economic collapse, like bank reforms, public work projects, and these were hugely unpopular with the wealthy elite, who saw them as a threat to their power. But the richest businessmen were angry. They feared FDR would seize their wealth and upend the capitalist system. I think people forget how controversial the New Deal stuff was, if you weren't like a beneficiary of it.
Yes.
It was such an upending of just America was just like a free-for-all, libertarian, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
For better or worse. And that whole thing got upended during the New Deal. In 1933, a wealthy businessman approached Butler with an outrageous proposal. He wanted Butler to lead an armed coup against Franklin Delano Roosevelt and set up a military dictatorship. The businessman promised him control of the country if he agreed to lead the rebellion.
Who was this? Who came to him?
Well, we got some names of people involved.
Okay. So he said in the video he was promised essentially an army of 500,000 people.
Yes.
And I assume to be the figurehead of this coup, to be the
He was going to be the
after?
dictator.
Okay.
But he had the backings. So in 1932, tens of thousands of World War I veterans, known as the, quote, bonus army, marched on Washington, D.C. and camped out in shanty towns near the Capitol, demanding early payment of their promised service bonuses to alleviate the economic hardship of the Great Depression. The bonus army consisted of World War I veterans and their families who traveled to D.C., which is what many think is where this plot was hatched. The veterans were led by Walter Waters and set up camps in parks and flats, constructing shacks from salvaged materials, creating what were known as Hoovervilles. This is how veterans were being treated. Well, now, first of all, so they have all these pensions and stuff, but they can't access the money.
Right.
And everybody's poor. And these are people who
promised
gave it all in Europe in World War I. So Herbert Hoover...
so the war ended in 1918. This is 14 years later, roughly?
Yeah, and they're hurting. So these men were in there.
They've been struggling through the Depression with this promise.
is promised money.
Yeah.
They wanted their bonuses.
Reasonable.
Over a decade later. So when Herbert Hoover, when Hoover ordered the camps cleared, this did lead to violence. This is all to set the backdrop. July 28, 1932, the U.S. Army, led by General Douglas MacArthur, used tear gas and other force to clear the bonus army camps,
Dude.
resulting in injuries and the deaths of 2 veterans.
So these World War I veterans go to get their money,
And the army.
and they're tear gassed again.
Yes.
They're gassed.
2 of them
again.
killed.
Yeah.
The bonus army march and the ensuing events became a symbol of the hardships of the Great Depression and the government's perceived failure to address the needs of the citizens.
I'm kind of embarrassed I've never heard of this.
Eventually, they did get their bonuses in 1936.
Well, it just goes to show if you're not being paid for a job you did and were promised payment, you should write them a letter.
This is known as the Forgotten March.
Well, that
Yeah,
makes sense.
you don't hear about this. It was a group of tens of thousands of demonstrators. Okay, so that's 1932. So and everybody's poor. So we're setting this up here, all right? So then what happens in 1932? FDR beats Hoover in the presidential election. He starts doing the Brave New Deal. So these businessmen get it in their head, oh, we hate Roosevelt. Just last year, wasn't there tens of thousands of people who went to try to go get their money? Now, keep in mind, these people were not paid till 36. So they said, hey, where's our money? They got tear gassed and shot. Now they're just home stewing. And so these big corporate giants are like, ooh, we have a common enemy with a bunch of pissed off 35-year-old World War I veterans.
Yeah.
And their plans were to, 1, overthrow FDR, 2, install a fascist dictatorship. Fascism also at this time very popular.
Yes.
Very popular. What year did Hitler and Mussolini come into power? Mussolini came into power in 1922 as prime minister. Hitler was appointed chancellor of Germany in 1933.
Okay.
So fascism was on the rise, and it would have been a very attractive form of government for the business people.
Yes.
Because it would have given some, it would have given some aid to the little people, but it would have been through the corporate. It wouldn't have,
Right.
It's kind of the union of corporations and political power. Here's the major conspirators. Number 1, J.P. Morgan.
Never surprised, always disappointed.
I love when you say that. J.P. Morgan. Number 2, John Raskob, chairman of General Motors.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So you got a banking giant, you have the car giant, Grayson Murphy, a financier with connections to DuPont, as well as the DuPont family, and H.H. Sinclair, an oil magnate.
Mm-hmm.
They had backed a paramilitary group, oh no, called the American Legion, a group of World War I veterans who were bitter about their treatment during and after the war and were ready to fight for a cause. So that's who approached him. So on July 1st, 1933, Butler met with McGuire and Bill Doyle for the first time. One of the main characters here, Gerald C. McGuire. McGuire was a $100 a week bond salesman for Wall Street banking firm Grayson Murphy and Company and a member of the Connecticut American Legion. So they sent one of their employees. Doyle was a commander of the Massachusetts American Legion. Butler stated that he was asked to run for national commander of the American Legion.
It's so crazy that there's a national commander of bingo halls. Just a national commander of cheap Bud Lights.
On July 3rd or 4th, Butler held a second meeting with McGuire and Doyle. They offered to get hundreds of supporters at the American Legion to ask for a speech. McGuire left a typewritten speech with Butler that they proposed that he read at the convention. It urged the American Legion convention to adopt a resolution calling for the United States to return to the gold standard so that when veterans were paid their bonuses, the money they received would not be worthless paper. The inclusion of this demand made Butler suspicious. Around August 1st, McGuire visited Butler alone. Butler stated that McGuire told him Grayson Murphy underwrote the formation of the American Legion in New York. And Butler told McGuire that the American Legion was nothing but a strike-breaking outfit. Butler never saw Doyle again. On September 24th, McGuire visited Butler's hotel room in Newark. In late September, Butler met with Robert Sterling Clark. Clark was an art collector and an heir to the Singer Sewing Company Corporation fortune. McGuire had known Clark when Clark was a second lieutenant in China during the Boxer Rebellion, where he had been nicknamed the Millionaire Lieutenant. So that's a timeline of him being approached by all these famous families. That must have been a very weird time for him.
Right.
So they were going to get, just last year there was one. They thought they could get 500,000 veterans from, this businessman calling the American Legion a strike breaking. This was like thought out. They had been, this makes a lot more sense too, because if Mussolini came up in 1922 and Hitler in 1933, that would be like peak Nazi time, peak fascism time.
Yes.
You'd be like, we've just watched a decade of this movement grow. And during that time, you're like funding this group of veterans. They wanted 500,000 veterans to go march again. So we're moving to 1934. During the first half of 1934, McGuire traveled to Europe and mailed postcards to Butler. On March 6th, McGuire wrote Clark and Clark's attorneys a letter describing the Croix de Feu, a nationalist French league of the interwar period. On August 22nd, Butler met McGuire at a hotel, which was the last time Butler met him. According to Butler's account, it was on this occasion that McGuire asked Butler to run a new veterans organization and lead a coup against the president. So this has been going on for over a year. On September 13th, a French reporter who had once been Butler's personal secretary met McGuire in his office. In late September, Butler told the veteran of Foreign Affairs Commander James E. Van Zandt that co-conspirators would be meeting him at an upcoming VFW convention. On November 20th, the committee began examining evidence. French broke the story in the Philadelphia Record and the New York Post on the 21st. On the 22nd, the New York Times wrote its first article on the story and described it as a, quote, gigantic hoax. Oh! The New York Times, always in the pocket.
Dude.
Always in the pocket.
That makes me angry.
One of the main characters here, Gerald C. McGuire.
I don't like that.
So remember this timeline. We're at like November 20th when Butler exposed the plot. The House Un-Americans Activities Committee began investigating. Despite the detailed testimony, no one was ever convicted of the plot. Some theorize the conspirators were so powerful that the investigation itself was a sham. Others argue that FDR was strategically silent, not wanting to openly attack powerful elites. Well, you know what happens when you do that. Mm-hmm. The investigation concluded with a weak reprimand, but the whole thing was largely swept under the rug. So they didn't disprove it. They just reprimanded their bad businessmen. The plot received limited media coverage at the time, and many Americans did not believe the story. Many considered Butler too radical, although his testimony became an important part of the public record. Butler's decision to expose the plot was key to preventing the conspiracy from gaining momentum. So
it seems like the business interests needed Smedley Butler to be like to be the linchpin.
That's why, they needed a strong leader.
Well, and they needed one person to lead the military side of it, because the business interests are all kind of acting independently in a way. There's not like one. It'd be like if I don't know. There's not one CEO that's like in control of all the corporations. So there's no general CEO. So I could see how it would fail because of that. He was the linchpin. Once you can get all those people marching in the same direction, so to speak, then the business people just need to fund it and put ideas in his head. Mm-hmm. And he's the one who's managing the personnel that would act on this. We almost became a fascist state in 1934.
Butler says that he simply pretended, because my big question was, why did he wait a year? He says he pretended to go along with the plot long enough to understand it, gather details, and report it. And then he went directly to the committee.
He probably also felt pretty powerless if this was happening, and they're like,
Oh, it's like all the most powerful people.
and they're all leaning on him, and then he's like, well, who the fuck would I tell? And then thankfully it broke in the paper, and so this committee was formed, and then he's like, oh, well, at least I have, at least I know there's some opposition to this.
Okay, Butler's a hero. Butler's a hero. I thought it was weird he said he was subpoenaed, but I guess that's a formality. So they picked the wrong guy, thank God.
Right, that's like, they did all the, oh man. They were just like grabbing for cash and influence, and they're like this, because they needed a guy that the troops would respect, and they thought they could turn him.
You know what's scary? Remember how Douglas MacArthur was the one who was tear gassing the veterans?
Yeah.
He might have been a better pick.
True.
Because he's the guy who said we fought the wrong enemy in World War II or whatever.
Oh, fuck. Okay.
He even suggested using nuclear weapons against China and Korea.
This is a part of history that's, I guess I don't know very much about, like the interwar period. Because you always just hear about the two big wars, and that kind of takes up all the space, and like, you learn about the Great Depression, but this was going on parallel to that.
Douglas MacArthur. I asked who would have been a good alternative. Douglas MacArthur, sympathetic to right-wing nationalist movements, and had clashed with FDR. He also had a deep ambition for personal power. Henry Ford? Huey Long? Okay. I'll let you have the final word.
Well,
thank God they didn't pick MacArthur. We would have been screwed.
yeah.
He would have been Emperor MacArthur.
Dude,
Assuming, I'm not going to besmirch Douglas MacArthur. But you got to think, like, of all the people in 1933, like, there had to have been somebody who would have went through with it.
right. Does it say Charles Lindbergh? Holy
While
fuck.
not a military leader, Lindbergh was a national hero with strong isolationist and pro-business views. He had sympathies for fascist regimes in Europe, which would have made him an attractive figure for the plot. You know what? Maybe they did approach multiple people.
Right.
Maybe the other people just kept their mouths shut. They're like, I'm not overthrowing the government, but I ain't gonna say nothing. Maybe Smedley, God damn it. Maybe Smedley was like way down on the list, you know?
That's true. Okay.
All right. Well, don't be overthrowing the government now.
Not to be a fascist state.
Yeah.
Do it for the right reasons.
Do it for the animals.
Free ponies for everyone.
Vermin Supreme,
I
baby.
support Vermin Supreme for Dictator of America.
I met Vermin Supreme once.
Oh, dude, legend.
On the street. I didn't go to an event or anything. I met him on the
He
street.
was just getting coffee.
I literally, I got off work super late. I worked in Topeka, and I'm walking to
Was he
a
wearing the boot?
Yes. I remember where I was. I was walking by. There was a bar. I was going to stop in and get a drink. And out of this freaking, like, alleyway, comes Vermin Supreme. And I'm like, what?
You were starstruck, probably.
I was like, I did one of these. I, like, walked up to the intersection where I would have entered the bar. And instead, I just, like, did a little loop. And I came back. And he was walking this other way. And I stopped him. And I got a picture.
Oh, that's awesome.
The picture is gone. I should have posted it on Facebook. And if it isn't gone and I find it, I'll post it on this thing. But yeah, he was really nice. He took a picture. Then I was like, then I texted it to some people and hardly anyone knew who he was.
Yeah.
But then I was like, wait, did I just take a picture with a random homeless person with a boot on his head? And then I looked it up and he had done an event earlier that day. It was just chilling around downtown Topeka. Well, that's a fun little ending story.
Thanks.
Y'all, sorry, go ahead.
Well,
Y'all come
thanks.
back now, you hear?
We love you.
Thug Life Certified.